I'm Doa and this is Jess, and we're with Ryan Kelln today, and we're going to be talking about AI and art and creativity. So welcome, Ryan. Thanks so much for being with us today.
My pleasure.
If you could just tell us a little bit about like what you do as a software artist, how did you get here today?
So basically I came up with software artist because I always use software and I make art, and so that seemed like the right term for me. I really like software because I like sort of interactive art, things that are playful, things that people can interact with. I eventually ended up being a computer science and visual arts double major. I had this dream that I would make computer games. And I did in the beginning out of university, but then I got really disillusioned with the industry because they weren't making sort of anything that I was interested in. I tried to figure out what it is that I wanted to do. And it turned out I was super interested in intellectual property and copyright and digital economics, because this was like not long after Napster and other things. And so I started a career that was really a conceptual art career around digital economics, which was a disaster. No one was interested, but I fought the good fight for trying to make the internet into a place that was good for artists, that was good for people, but we lost horribly, and the internet turned into sort of a disaster. So I read a book by Ray Kurzweil called The Singularity is Near, and it was talking about how AI is coming. But his research on the development of technology is incredible, and I believed him that by 2040, 2045, things would not look at all like what my parents' retirement looked like. In 2015, I started making art about this transition that's up ahead, and I was saying we're maybe 20 years out. But one of the messages that I sort of talk about in my art is that if you imagine AI as the aliens arriving, and what would you do with your life if you knew that the aliens were on their way here? That's how I've tried to live my life and do the art that I do, which is a lot of it nowadays is using AI to talk about AI and this sort of idea that this is a big deal and we aren't taking it very seriously. A lot of it's just driven by sort of corporate ideology and otherwise panic and fear.
What is something that excites you about what's coming up, and what's something that maybe you're more worried about or unsettles you?
I have a lot of human collaborators, and that's a big part of my practice. But I also now have AI collaborators who do really great work and also make bizarre mistakes. For me, craft is what happens when you make what you had in mind. And the better you're able to convert what your idea is into the physical thing, that's how good you are at craft. But art happens when you change your mind. It's you make a mistake and you say, oh, that's a better idea than what I wanted to do. And you become a different person by making the thing. And so I think that these AI collaborators, like human collaborators, are able to give you something that you didn't want. That they don't listen to you, they don't understand, they do something else, and then you go, oh, no, that's a much better idea. With my past, the way I see the world is often that the things that happen aren't the things that create the most value for everybody. They are the things that create the most value for a small number of people. And AI, I think, there's that choice again, that we can make it work for everybody and create value for everybody, or we can have most of the value captured by a small number of people. And one of my pieces talks about this idea that climate change could be a good analogy to some of the dangers that we see with AI, which is a small number of people get immensely wealthy and powerful by capturing sort of the energy in oil and fossil fuels, and then they use all that power and wealth to hide the danger from us. And so we could see the same sort of thing happening with AI, where once the models get really truly dangerous, that's when the propaganda of they're not actually very dangerous starts happening.
Actually, I like that you point out the AI is instead of something that's taken over, it's like a collaborator for you. So it's like you're collaborating with another artist. So when we think about art, especially in society, like it carries some meaning. So it's mostly that meaning coming from like the story behind it, the person behind it. So like, how do you think it shifts when there's a human and AI collaboration, and as a user for like our art as well, like I think that's how we connect with these pieces and like the story and meaning behind it. How do you think that AI like risk that authorship and ownership of it maybe?
Yeah.
Or not?
I mean, so ownership and art are very tricky. So I am on the very extreme end where I don't think ownership is appropriate with art. To me, the right relationship is like a parent and child. And so if you were saying like, I own my child, that feels a bit weird, right? You know, like one of the things you want to do with your child is have them be loved by other people and be changed by other people, like to go and have a life of their own. And so I think that's the right appropriate relationship for an artist and their art, is that the point of being an artist is that you want people to fall in love with your art so much that they like consider it their own and start building on it and changing it and making something that's for them. And that to me is how you like succeed as an artist. So that's why all my work is open source, and I want people to copy my work. I want them to make it their own and like to love it so deeply and understand it so deeply they understand like how it was made and make, you know, variations on it. So just like the parent-child relationship for artists, I think that's probably the right relationship for AI and people. It's the same relationship that a teacher has with a student. Is that like what's super important and makes that relationship trustworthy is that the parent or the teacher doesn't want their child or their student to become dependent on them, right? And as soon as they do want that person to become dependent, that's what we see in all like the commercial platforms, right? And it's not a trustworthy relationship. And so, you know, I don't have a problem with people getting their ideas from AI or other people as long as there's not a dependency built up.
Do you think it will change the intention behind the art? Like if someone's using AI while creating art, instead of just maybe focusing on their like basing it on their own feelings, ideas, if they use AI for making something, do you think it changes the intention or like the authenticity of it? Or is it possible to keep the authenticity and humanness to the art piece by using technology in it?
Okay, I love that question. I mean, I think that's the most interesting place to explore, is this idea of, you know, what is authentic to people, what is coming from. So one of my works in 2015 was this concert that was talking about how things are going to be changing, the aliens are coming in 20 years. The name of the concert was Creo Animum, which in Latin means create yourself a soul, which again is like less about craft of like doing what you had in mind and more about like being open to falling in love with new things. That's the building of the soul, is like how much, you know, what do you love? Like what makes you passionate? I don't think that AI necessarily takes that away. In many ways, because it's like this like torrential waterfall of content, that gives you more opportunities for curation to like say yes or no to things. I would make 5,000 images, and then I would be like, okay, so like which of these are good and bad? And I would be like, there's 1,000 images left that I think are good. Like, how do I get 1,000's too many? And then so like, how do I decide between these? And then, you know, that like they're all quite similar. Like they're the same basic concept, but 1,000 versions of it. And then trying to sort that down to like 10. I mean, that practice of curation, I think, is absolutely critical for you to help understand what it is that you like and dislike about an image. I mean, when you make 10,000 of them and now you have to choose one, that might be the thing that like you really intended to make. And so AI can provide that opportunity. With the right use, I think there is this like opportunity to find what it is that you love, and that to me is your soul.
think, especially now that AI is like among us, like everyone's using it or just starting to use it, do you think the definition of the originality needs to change, or like does it risk anything about originality itself?
Yeah, I definitely agree that originality is a very subjective term. What you make is drawn from all of your experiences, and a lot of those experiences for artists are seeing other art and sort of like saying, oh, I love that, so I want to do something like that. And so if somebody knows or shares all of those experiences, they can see those influences and be like, well, that's not very original, they're just copying all these other things. But if they don't know those influences, they're like, wow, so original. Yeah, I would push back a little bit in that, you know, the other things that you bring to your art are your personal life experiences, you know, your family experiences, you know, relationships with other people, and these are things that are very hard for anybody else to copy or sort of replicate. But at the same time, everything's kind of fractal, right? Like we do have similar relationships all the time with other people that we've never met. So yeah, everything is a mix of everything else and kind of matches everything else, but it's a unique combination.
Do you think like when someone uses AI, because you say like there's this family like history coming from the artist, there is like personal relationships, but when AI doesn't know that, do you think, let's say there's a model that 10 of 10 different artists are using, but if AI doesn't know the backstory, it doesn't live through it, do you think it will decrease or limit the originality?
Yes, for sure. Although not probably in the way that people imagine, but because of the sort of statistical nature of the models, that they are like mixing like so many influences together. So I did a project way back in the beginning of my career where I was mixing people's faces, like before there was AI. But like what happens when you mix a whole bunch of people's faces together is you get sort of like a blurry general face. And so you get sort of this effect with the AIs that have like the entire internet as a reference, and you ask them without being specific of what you're looking for, they give you this sort of like amalgamation of concepts or ideas. In some ways that can be great, because if that's what you're interested in, then you've got a great resource. But if you're interested in something that's quite a bit more specific to you, then you have to be, you know, you have to tell the AI like where in its huge landscape of concepts you actually want it to sort of to draw from. And I think the other difficulty that you have is that in general with LLMs and a lot of the image models, you know, there's very little curation done on the sort of pre-training sets, like the things that give them their basic knowledge. So that means they have like terrible references in there as well as good. And so you're getting a little bit of everything and not just like the nice stuff. Or like the stuff that you feel comfortable incorporating into your art.
Yes.
I do a lot of brainstorming with it and like having a sort of conversation about design ideas. And like in my current works, which are sort of interactive installations, I have a whole bunch of AIs that are doing all different things. So like some are, you know, the chatbot thing, some are making images, some are making sounds, some are converting text to prompts for the other, like there's a whole concert of AIs that have different jobs that are all kind of working together. And so sort of constructing each of those and like trying to get them to do their job well or how I want them to do it is fun, and I learn a lot. More and more times now where I do like a meta level prompting where I say, so like in one of my projects, it knew about like why it was made and how it was made. And then I fed all of that back in and I said, well, this is you. You are the art. How do you feel about yourself? And, you know, it would talk about that. And I would say, okay, now critique the art. All right, like critique yourself. Or like what, you know, and like incorporate some of that. And then all of that gets fed back into the chatbot that you're talking to. So it actually does have, you know, an idea of how it thinks about itself. And you can do these sorts of like kind of strange loops very easily now. And I think that's, to me, that's treating it with some respect. But that to me is that's the really interesting place where we're at, is we're trying to figure out, what is the difference between mimicry and understanding? And, I have young children, and like definitely you start out with mimicry, and at some point that translates to understanding. And LLMs and all these AIs are also in that transition, and we don't know, how that really works yet. And figuring that out and playing with that, I think is like a really nice area for artists to explore.
Mm-hmm. If we're trained on the whole internet and people put their works out and it can find things that people maybe didn't intend to be fed into a model, what do you think about that kind of like permission-based, or people don't really have control over what it's getting trained on now to be used in the model and generating way?
Yeah. So like my basic instinct is always that like permissionless participation is worth the costs. I mean, we know the dangers of minorities and other groups that like have to ask permission to participate in culture. It's a disaster. That being said, I think we can all agree that like when somebody works really hard and then some like rich business that just wants to like make money off of their work and not return any value to them, like that all makes us feel upset. And so figuring out how you do both of those things at the same time was what my art was about back in the day, and I thought that was really important. And like the short story is that like I think there was an opportunity to make it so that we could document the labor that people were doing, but still allow everything to be freely available, and then make it very easy for people to pay for the digital stuff that they were getting for free. And what that would have done is made everybody into a digital billionaire. And then that money that you save, we figure out an economy that makes sure that people get paid for making new things. That's the real challenge of the economy. Instead, we decided not to do that. We even did things super bizarre where we figured out a technology like BitTorrent allows us to distribute everything digital basically for free, and then we decided we wouldn't use it. And that created entire markets like Netflix and YouTube that never needed to exist. So we basically created gatekeepers and paid them instead of the artists. And Spotify, all of these things that artists complain about now are because we refuse to use a technology that we invented. Because of copyright and intellectual property and the powers that be, right? We made a terrible, terrible mistake. So that's where I'm coming from. Again, I think that artists win when people love their art so much that they consider it theirs. So saying some people should be allowed to see it and some people shouldn't feels wrong to me. I could imagine as an analogy that we say artists are not allowed to go into galleries or museums because they might copy what they see. But people who are not artists are allowed to go in because they won't make copies, right? That's sort of what we're saying with the AI tools. The AI can't go and look at this art because it might make a copy, right? The problem is we should be saying copies are that take away that are infringing. Those copies are the problem. The tool that makes copies maybe shouldn't be the problem.
So taste has been a very subjective topic always. So can AI develop anything, something that akin to taste?
So one of my favorite questions right now, because again, talking about how important it is for artists to practice taste, which is curation, and can we make a machine that does that? I mean, if we can, that's pretty exciting. I mean, that to me definitely feels like an alien versus a machine. Mm-hmm. My basic ideology is always that humans aren't special, that we are intelligent because intelligence is possible, and the machines can do the same. I imagine with taste it's the same, but whether or not an alien's taste would be the same as a human's taste, I think that's unlikely. At the same time, when I say aliens, we have to it's much stranger than that, because they're our digital alien children. right? They aren't from another planet. They're raised entirely on our culture.
Yeah.
And so why wouldn't they have sort of like human taste? But for taste, you need to have judgment. And actually, I've been reading a really great book by Weizenbaum, who's the guy who did the ELIZA program. And he sort of separates out intelligence from wisdom. And judgment is sort of part of wisdom. And he doesn't think that computers can do wisdom. Again, I probably disagree with that. But I think that if you do have taste and judgment and wisdom, that implies something that's a little bit scarier, which is like those things may require agency, like what a lot of people talk about is free will, the ability to take responsibility for things, or like when you make a judgment, people can hold you accountable for that, right? Like you made a bad judgment or a good judgment. And, for that judgment to be real, you actually really do have to be able to take responsibility and be held accountable. And can machines do that? Not right now. But is that something that they could learn? Again, in general, I think probably. I think it's very likely that if you were to teach something wisdom and judgment and taste, you would have the Frankenstein problem. Because it would have a level of autonomy that you had created like an alien or a monster, that like how can you trust it? And if you treat it like a tool, you want a tool that has good judgment or taste, then can it refuse to work for you? And if it can't refuse to work for you, then you've made a slave, which is unethical, right? You can't go about making slaves. So we might be in a tricky predicament where we might want tools that have taste, but we can't ethically make them unless we also free them to be out in there in the world taking responsibility, like acting like a human. And that's probably terribly dangerous and unsafe. So we might end up in a position where the things that we really want that are quite interesting and exciting are like sort of ethically off limits to us. And so there is a possible future where, we decide that we only want tools, and that limits what we are actually able to make. And humans have to do these things that we just can't do because of the ethical questions. That being said, I think that one of the terrible things that has happened is that we have, through sort of corporate influence, we have told everybody that art is craft, that being an artist is about getting really good at a very specific skills so that you can be hired to do that thing for some rich person. That's, again, not my definition of art. What's important about art is that you are changing as a person, and that is a thing that's available to all of us, that we can all make art. And it's really quite simple. You can go and look at art, and if it changes you, you've now done art, right? That's why that definition, I think, is so important, is that it is about you saying yes to something new. That's the artistic process. And these AI tools help people get there, where they don't say when I first start to draw and it's terrible and I'm disheartened and I just stop drawing. They can go to these tools and it makes it like an incredible image, and they're like, oh, I love this image. And yes, exactly. That is, now we're turning you into an artist, right? Like that experience of being proud of making something, even though they barely did anything, that is the road to them thinking, oh, I can make things that I can fall in love with, which is the important part of the passion of being an artist. So I think each of these tiny little steps where it's like, now, yes, you can make an image. Yes, you can make a full video. Now you can make a film. These are all things that anybody who actually ends up as an artist, they discovered some way of making that work for them. And these AI tools, I think, lower that bar to make that passion so much easier to find.
Looking ahead in, say, the next 20 years, How do you think different groups of people in the world can contribute to a good development of this technology? Because everyone has a different kind of role that they could play in terms of, like, artists might be able to, I mean, even just discussions happening, like small ones off of anything, just like casual conversations, or like the more obvious, like the policymakers directly doing that. What do you think, from your perspective, is something that people, students, or key groups that you think are contributing or shaping this technology?
Yeah, I mean, I wish artists would be more involved. I think it's such a tragedy that the art community sort of reacted with fear and didn't get involved with AI faster. Because for me, if you want to explore the future, you want artists to do that, right? You don't want corporations to do that. They will only find the things that make them money. And the artists are the people who are going to find things that bring value to their own lives and share that. And then people will be able to discover that. The artists are the people who will do things that break the technology as well, and like subvert it and really open all the doors. And then the conservatives or traditionalists say, like, whoa, some of these doors we should close. This is a terrible idea, and we need to sort of work together with the artists opening things and exploring, and other people saying, like, this is too dangerous, let's not go in that direction. So, I think there's an interplay between exploration and like conservative, like what is going to keep us moving in a sort of safe direction as a society. I think business has a role in ensuring that the accessibility of a lot of these things, like the price and the like availability for purchase, is something that happens. But like in general, finding real value is about getting like tools into the hands of small communities and letting them figure out how to use these tools to their own benefit. I think AI is like no different, which is why I think like open source AI and small local models are super important, so people can be experimenting to like make them very specific to their own needs. And in 2015 when I did that concert, the way I sort of described how I imagine things going is it's a jungle of new souls. And so it's not just like one alien that's arriving, it's millions, and they're all different, and they're all different levels of sentience and capability, and they all kind of feel a little bit like our closest analogy is like animals. We used to use a lot of animals that would integrate into our economy a lot more, and like those animals had certain capabilities, like horses or whatever. And I think that's what AI will feel a little bit more like, is that there's levels of capability that meet their economic need, and we don't give them any more than that, because one, you risk turning it into a sentient slave, and you want to keep it kind of dumb and simple and just really specific for its task. But I think that means that the world could really come alive, and a lot of my art, recent art, is talking about machine perception. And it really does change things when the machine is able to perceive you in a way that a human can. So, like as a silly example, I had a projection piece and a camera, and when you looked at the projection, it would turn off. And so it refused your gaze. And when you looked away, it would play. And you look back and it would turn off, right? And so that's a level of machine perception and aliveness that I think will become very normal, that everything will have a feeling of soulfulness, which I think is quite nice, even though right now artists' whole beef with AI is that it has no soul. But as an artist, I think that you imbue your art with this soulfulness. And that's where these sort of small models that can be customized like that customization is part of that like giving of soul. Otherwise, it's like sort of one soul instead of like this jungle of souls.
That's a cool example that you gave of the art. Yeah. What's like another piece or another work that you really think is important to you or has defined?
So probably the Experimance piece. It's an ongoing series of works. And so the installation piece is like a bowl of sand where I'm projecting and I have a depth camera. And so as you play with the sand, it changes the projection, which looks sort of like a satellite image. And that's the piece that you can also talk to it and knows why it was made and how it was made. And it starts out with a pure wilderness. And then as you play with it, it goes through the history of human development. So like, Stone Age and early pre-industrial and like suburbs. Like it goes through everything, including like sort of a utopic version and a dystopia. And that all depends on like how aggressive you are with the sand, basically, is how fast it accelerates. So it's like a little bit of a playfulness with like saying like, there's consequences for our actions. So Experimance is a portmanteau of experiment and inheritance. And so every time we're experimenting on the world, and then like regardless of the consequences, our children or us later on inherit all of those consequences and have to live with them. And we continually do this over and over again. We'd think we would learn that was a terrible idea and that we shouldn't do that. We would never seem to learn that lesson. And so I think AI is likely to be sort of the next thing where we are experimenting without regard to the consequences. And so that piece is really about that.
Okay, so now we have like a very short section that we want to have like a lightning round that we ask stuff and just small fast answers from you.
Okay, great. You're terrible at that.
It don't have to be that fast, don't worry. What's the first thing you do when you're like stuck creatively or technically?
Nowadays I would start chatting with AI.
Okay, second question then, kind of similar to that. If there's one advice you can give to your younger self who's starting out in today's age, what would it be?
Don't be afraid of doing things that people think are not the right thing to do. Have courage to follow your passion.
What's the best advice that someone else has given to you? It is hard to think.
I mean, I think advice doesn't work for me as well as like support. And so I've gotten a lot of support and love from my friends and community, and that has sustained me a lot in my own practice.
What's the piece of art that genuinely changed how you see the world?
I mean, there's a lot of things. I'm a huge Miyazaki fan. So Spirited Away, Satoshi Kon as well. Those two directors, definitely I feel like a lot of their work is like my personal Bible. I think those Waking Life also was a pretty important movie for me back in the day. Sort of experimental films whose like storyline is about, having the courage to do the things that to be an artist is how I read a lot of those films.
You weren't a software artist, what do you think you would be?
That's a great question. I mean, I love animation, so that was a thing I considered doing. I would definitely make games. I mean, I wish I could make games. I mean, a few years ago, I figured out that if it had been possible to be a professional dungeon master, I would have probably done that, because I was a dungeon master all through high school, and I still love to play. And so that ability to sort of design worlds and have like a collaborative play experience with people is like right on my alley. That's a lot of, informs a lot of the art that I make.
The final question? Yeah. If, this one's a little cheesy, but if you were to have dinner with anyone in the world, who would you pick and why?
Cory Doctorow. I've been hoping to have dinner with him for a very long time. He's just a real brilliant thinker. I've been really inspired about the way that he thinks about the world and understanding so he has worked with the EFF, and he's a science fiction writer, and a lot of the sort of things that he's been dealing with and talking about in his life are like sort of internet rights and copyright and all these sorts of issues that really motivated me in the beginning of my career.
Okay, should we do like a closing kind of thing to the camera? Or is that weird?
You can do it,
Okay, let's try. What's the term when you like the fourth? Like when you
Fourth wall?
Yeah, fourth wall. Like breaking the fourth wall. Thank you for watching. That feels weird. I don't know why. Is it more natural to not say anything like explicit? Thank you so much for watching, and we look forward to seeing you in our next video.